Hi, I'm Arlena. My own family looked me in the eye and treated me like trash. I walked into the bank my father built, asked to withdraw $5 million that was legally mine. And my sister-in-law? She laughed. She screamed across the lobby, "If you even have a balance, I'll pay you double!" Then she had the guards drag me out like a criminal, in front of everyone. But what they didn't know, what not a single one of them checked, was that I'm the CEO of that bank. Now tell me, how do you forgive betrayal like that? The moment I stepped through the revolving glass doors, I felt it. Judgment in the air, thick like the humidity outside. The kind of judgment that clings to your skin, no matter how many layers of self-confidence you wrap around yourself. The lobby of the downtown Houston bank gleamed like a showroom, white marble floors, chrome fixtures, that sterile scent of commercial cleaning products and air-conditioned arrogance. Every sound bounced off the glass, clicking heels, hushed conversations, fingers tapping on screens. I'd been in rooms like this before, but today wasn't about business. Today it was personal. I walked slowly, my boots echoing louder than they should have. Not stilettos, not patent leather pumps, boots. Not because I was trying to make a statement, but because I'd forgotten how this place expected you to dress just to be respected. A young teller at the far end of the counter noticed me first. Her eyes slid from my boots to my denim skirt, lingered for a beat too long, then snapped away like I'd burned her with embarrassment by simply existing. She leaned toward her coworker, whispered something, and they both chuckled. Didn't bother to look back at me, but I felt their laughter between my shoulder blades like a slap. I didn't react. That's something you learn after years of being underestimated. Silence isn't weakness, it's leverage. I approached the counter, and an older woman with a tight bun and tighter smile slid a form toward me without eye contact. "Deposit or withdrawal?" she asked, eyes still glued to her screen. "Withdrawal," I said, calm, steady. She tapped something into her keyboard. Still didn't look at me. I could tell they'd already decided who I was. Maybe someone late on her rent? Maybe a struggling mom hoping a check cleared. Certainly not someone worth standing up for. I swallowed down the old familiar burn in my throat, the kind that used to rise when my brothers called me tag-along at family gatherings, or when my father would tell me, "Sweetheart, let the men talk business." Today, that burn was fuel. Behind me, the elevator dinged. Out stepped Marjorie. Marjorie Klein, my sister-in-law, my late husband's sister. She ran this branch, ran it like a kingdom, and never once let me forget that she was the queen. Her heels clicked against the floor like punctuation marks. Her suit was tailored within an inch of its life, lipstick fresh, not a single strand of her highlighted bob out of place. She offered warm smiles to two elderly clients sitting near the lounge, patted the arm of one, and laughed at something the other said. Then her eyes landed on me. And just like that, the temperature in the room dropped 5 degrees. "Well, well," she said, drawing out every syllable like syrup over ice. "Sweet little farmer girl. What brings you to my branch today?" I hadn't lived on the farm since I was 18, but to her, I'd always be that naive girl from the country who married her brother and lucked into a better life. I smiled. Small, polite. Didn't let the barbs sink in. "I'm here to make a transaction," I replied. "Oh?" She stepped behind the counter and gave the older teller a slight nod, dismissal masked as delegation. "You know, we have ATMs for small withdrawals." Her voice was sugary sweet for the client still within earshot, but her eyes held the venom. The kind of contempt that doesn't come from a single insult, but years of perceived slights. I stayed quiet. Not because I didn't have 1,000 things to say, but because I'd learned that letting people underestimate you is the sharpest blade you can carry. Marjorie glanced at my hands, probably noting the absence of designer jewelry, then gave a dramatic sigh. "Well, if you've got your ID, I suppose we can see what's left in your account." There it was. The moment she thought she had the upper hand. Everyone behind the counter was half listening now, pretending to do their jobs, but their curiosity was barely masked. One guy straightened up in his seat. Another leaned forward like he didn't want to miss the punchline. I held her gaze. Cool? Measured? I'd like to make a withdrawal of $5 million. Silence. It hit the room like a glass shattering on tile. The woman in the bun paused mid-typing. A client to my left actually dropped his pen. Marjorie blinked once, twice, then laughed, loudly. "Oh, honey," she said, grinning for the crowd. "If you even have a balance, I'll pay you double." Her words echoed, not just because of the acoustics, but because everyone wanted to see what I'd do next. Instead, I calmly reached into my bag and placed my ID on the counter. Her face changed, just slightly, just enough. A man in a blazer, security probably, appeared near the entrance, summoned by Marjorie's barely perceptible wave. "Escort this woman out," she said, loud enough for the room to hear. I didn't resist. I picked up my ID, tucked it back into my bag, and walked past the wide-eyed staff like a ghost. But as I reached the doors, a voice called out behind me, deep, gravelly. "Wait a minute. That's Arlena Whitlow." Everyone turned. The voice belonged to Buford Hayes, one of the oldest and richest clients at the branch. His expression wasn't just recognition, it was respect. CEO of Whitlow Capital. She owns the bank. A second silence followed, but this one was different. Heavier, more electric. I didn't look back, but I felt it. Every eye in the room shifting, every assumption collapsing. I stepped into the sunlight, heat washing over me like a second skin, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. "I'd like to make a withdrawal of $5 million, I said, placing my ID on the counter with steady hands. You could have heard a pin drop. Then, the silence cracked, first with a smirk from the receptionist, then a cough trying to hide a laugh. Someone near the back let out a short, surprised chuckle. Eyes darted around, not sure if they were supposed to laugh or hold their breath. It felt familiar, like sitting at a childhood dinner table, saying something bold, only to be met with raised brows and the low hum of disbelief. I could almost hear my older brother's voice from back then. "You really think anyone takes you seriously, Arlena?" That same wave of dismissal washed over me now, but louder, more public, and laced with the sting of adulthood. Marjorie, never one to miss a spotlight, stepped forward with an exaggerated gasp. Her red nails tapped against the marble counter like she was beating out a drum roll. "$5 million?" she repeated, dragging each syllable. "Oh, honey, if you even have 500, I'll be shocked." The room erupted. Not into chaos, but worse. Into careful, controlled amusement. The kind you see at country clubs when someone spills cheap wine on an expensive rug. It wasn't messy. It was cutting. She turned to the staff behind her, loud enough to ensure every soul in the lobby could hear her next line. "You all heard her, right? $5 million. She must think she's at Monopoly Bank." The security guards exchanged a glance. The younger one tried not to react. The older one smirked. Just barely. I looked at her then. Really looked. Marjorie had always worn her cruelty like a designer blazer, tailored, expensive-looking, and completely intentional. This wasn't off-the-cuff mockery. It was a performance. A statement. She wasn't just trying to embarrass me. She was trying to bury me. Her voice raised again, even more theatrical. "You know what?" she said, hands on her hips. "If you even have a balance, I'll pay you double." That got the biggest reaction yet. Someone behind the counter actually clapped once before catching themselves. Another staff member covered their mouth and turned away. I didn't flinch. She turned to the guards now, snapping her fingers like she was calling in the dogs. "Escort her out. She's clearly confused." They moved toward me. No hesitation. The younger one took my left arm, the older gripped the right. Their hands weren't rough out of necessity. They just were. Like they'd already decided I was less than human. A threat not worth understanding. My heels scraped softly against the floor as they turned me around. But I didn't struggle. Their hands were rough, but my silence was sharper. I kept my eyes ahead, chin high, letting their grip dig in just enough to remind me how power can shift hands in seconds, and how quickly people reveal who they truly are when they think they're in control. As they pulled me toward the doors, I caught Buford Hayes watching from the lounge. He hadn't moved. His expression was unreadable, but not indifferent. He'd seen something, not just the show Marjorie was putting on, but the cracks in her mask. She wanted me gone. She wanted me humiliated. But I had walked into this bank with a reason, and she had just handed me everything I needed to finish what I came to start. I stopped. Not because they let me, but because I planted my feet. "Let go," I said softly. The guards hesitated, surprised by the sudden command. Buford stood up. I turned to Marjorie, still lounging by the counter like she was hosting a fashion show. "You'll regret this display," I whispered. Her smirk twitched, just for a split second, and that was all I needed. As the guards pulled me across the lobby, their grips firm on each arm, I didn't fight. I didn't speak. My heels slid quietly on the polished floor, but the noise inside me was deafening. Shame, anger, familiarity. The glass doors inched closer, but in my mind something else was opening, something older, deeper. It started with a voice. "You really think they'd ever let someone like you run anything?" Kenneth's voice, clear as day. That memory had been packed away for years, buried under success, responsibility, and grit. But now, as strangers dragged me out of a building my company owned, it came flooding back. It was a warm Sunday evening, the kind where Texas mosquitoes outnumber your thoughts, and the kitchen smells like cornbread and something overcooked. I was 17. Sitting at the long oak dining table in our family's ranch-style house, clutching a notepad. Dinner was always loud, voices layered over one another, opinions tossed around like biscuits. But mine always got lost somewhere between the roast and my father's latest frustration with politics. That night, I cleared my throat and said, "I think we should talk about the way we manage the family savings. Maybe we could—" My father didn't even glance up from his plate. "Sweetheart, leave finance to your brother," he said, jabbing a forkful of meatloaf like it owed him something. Marjorie sipped her wine and looked amused. My mother chimed in right after, cheerful and oblivious. "Oh, did anyone remember to pick up more butter this week?" Just like that, gone. My idea, my voice, me. I sat back in my chair, folded the notepad closed, and swallowed whatever pride was left. The moment didn't explode. It evaporated, quietly, efficiently, like they'd practiced. Even back then, I learned something. You don't have to scream to disappear. You just have to speak to the wrong people. The doors of the bank loomed, but I wasn't in Houston anymore. I was in a college dorm room, a cheap corkboard behind me, and Marjorie standing in the doorway. Kenneth was next to her, arms folded, smug as always. I'd invited them over because I was proud. I had just finished an internship at a small investment firm. I was glowing with the thought of my future. "I think someday I'd like to lead a company," I said. "Maybe even a bank." Kenneth snorted. Marjorie didn't even try to hide her laughter. "You," she said, eyebrows raised, like I'd told her I planned to colonize Mars. "People like you don't lead, Arlena. You follow." That line, it stuck. Even years later, in meetings, when someone questioned me, I'd hear it, not in their voices, but in hers, in Kenneth's, in my father's silence. It was never just about being underestimated. It was about being erased before I even began. And now here I was, 2 security guards ushering me out, while Marjorie got to laugh again, just like she did then. Just louder. And with more people to witness it, the lobby hadn't changed. Buford still stood by the lounge chairs, arms crossed, eyes sharp. Not judging, just watching. Calculating. He'd seen something shift, not just in how I stood or the way my jaw tightened, but in what this entire scene meant. There was power in silence, and he knew it. Men like him had seen pride turn into empire or vengeance. I turned back slightly. Marjorie was already pivoting, her heels clicking confidently as she walked away like she'd won. But I wasn't broken, not this time. Every insult they once whispered in dining rooms, they now shouted in a lobby, and this time, people were listening. I stared at the reflection in the glass. Me, flanked by security guards, but standing straighter than I had in years. This wasn't just about humiliation, it was about history, and I was done letting theirs dictate mine. The doors were only a few steps away. I could see my reflection in the glass, tousled hair, jaw clenched, eyes burning, not from shame, but calculation. The guards were still gripping my arms, but I wasn't fighting. I didn't need to, not yet. I turned my head slowly, not jerking or flailing, just shifting my gaze back to where Marjorie still stood, arms crossed like she'd just finished sweeping dust off the porch. She was proud of herself, of what she'd done. It was written all over her smug little smirk. "If you continue," I said, calmly but loud enough that every soul in that lobby could hear me, "this won't end the way you think." The room fell into a hush, not a respectful silence, but the kind that trembles just under the surface, like a pot about to boil over. The guards hesitated, unsure if they should keep dragging me or wait to see if I suddenly pulled out a lawsuit. Marjorie raised an eyebrow like she'd just stepped in something unpleasant. "Excuse me?" I didn't blink. "You should think twice before making promises in front of witnesses." Buford, the older client who'd been pretending not to eavesdrop, shifted his weight from one foot to the other. His expression was hard to read, somewhere between curiosity and concern. "What exactly do you think this is?" Marjorie laughed, a brittle sound that bounced off the glass walls. "A courtroom? Girl, you walked into my bank, made a scene, and now you're spouting riddles like some kind of, what, corporate prophet?" I didn't reply. I didn't need to. That's what unnerved her. "You really think anyone here cares what you say?" She pressed on, now raising her voice so the tellers and clients had no choice but to listen. "Let me make it simple. You pull stunts like this again, and I'll personally see to it that your name gets flagged at every financial institution from here to El Paso." Someone behind a desk gasped. I caught the flicker of a hand covering a mouth. "That's right," she continued, basking in the attention. "You'll be blacklisted. You'll be lucky if a gas station lets you swipe your card." I could feel the tension in the guards' arms. They were trying to stay neutral, but even they knew she was going too far. Power abused starts to stink, and the room was beginning to reek. I stood there, letting her words wash over me like bad weather, loud, obnoxious, ultimately harmless if you knew how to build shelter. "Marjorie," I said, voice steady, "you're mocking someone you don't understand." She laughed again, but there was a flicker, a tiny hitch in her tone that told me I'd struck something. "Understand you?" she scoffed. "Honey, I've known you since Kenneth dragged you to that Christmas dinner in corduroy and a bad perm. You were nobody then, and you're nobody now." And there it was, the last match. She lit it without thinking, and it was already burning in her hand. I didn't flinch. "What you think you know is exactly why this will be so satisfying." Her mouth opened, probably to say something crueler, but she caught the look in Buford's eyes. He was watching her now, not me. "Escort her out," she snapped, deflecting the attention. "Now!" The guards resumed their grip, and I let them. I didn't struggle. I didn't speak. I just walked. Or rather, I let myself be walked. Because when you're planning a storm, sometimes you let the wind drag you for effect. As we moved across the marble floor, I could hear her laughter behind me. Loud, self-assured, hollow, like a chandelier swinging in a storm, pretty, but one hard shake from falling. Outside, the light was harsh. Texas mornings had a way of slapping you with clarity. But I wasn't rattled. I was already calculating. She thought she'd won. Everyone inside thought so too. Let her believe it. Because the worst kind of opponent is the one who waits, smiling, while the trap closes. The car door shut with a soft click, but the noise echoed louder in my chest than anything Marjorie had screamed. I sat motionless in the driver's seat, my hands still trembling slightly on the steering wheel. I didn't start the engine. I didn't even reach for the gear shift. I just stared through the windshield as Marjorie's laugh, still lingering in the air like a bad perfume, dissolved into silence. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was foolish to think I'd ever rise above the shadow they always insisted I stay in. That voice crept in again, the one I thought I'd buried years ago. It sounded an awful lot like my brother's. "You overthink everything, Arlena," he'd said once, not long after I'd graduated. "It's why you'll always chase things you can't catch." I'd laughed it off back then, pretending his words didn't sting. But in moments like this, humiliated, alone, dismissed like some unimportant nuisance, those words rang loud, louder than Marjorie. Louder than my own thoughts. I leaned back and closed my eyes. The memories came fast and sharp. Sunday dinners at my parents' house. Me, awkward and too quiet, slipping ideas into the conversation just to be heard, just to feel like part of something. And each time, every single time, Kenneth or my father would cut me off, chuckling like I'd told a joke I didn't understand. "Sweetheart," Dad once said, carving a roast like it was a courtroom gavel, "leave the money talk to your brother." And Mom, always quick to change the subject, would ask about my outfit, my hair, anything but my ideas, as if real thoughts were too heavy for me, as if my presence was ornamental, nothing more. They always called me the dreamer, never in a kind way. I'd hear them whisper about me when they thought I wasn't listening. "She's fragile. She's not cut out for pressure. That girl's head is always in the clouds." So I stayed silent. I smiled at the right times. I worked twice as hard in silence while they paraded around with their half-built confidence and names carved onto brass plaques. And now, this. Dragged out of a building I technically owned, laughed at like a fool in front of strangers, my name spat out like it was gum stuck to someone's shoe. I reached for my phone, more out of habit than purpose. The screen lit up. 2 missed calls, some social media notification, and 1 unread email. It was from the compliance division. Subject: signature authority, digital confirmation, complete. I blinked, opened it, and then I read it again. And again. My heart, only moments ago curled up in a corner, now sat upright. It was a standard automated message, confirming my administrative clearance and legal authority to approve all financial decisions under my executive credentials. As CEO. The authority was active, not pending, not conditional. Active. I wasn't just technically in charge, I was indisputably, contractually, and digitally recognized by the very institution Marjorie thought she ruled over. I laughed. Not the bitter kind. Not the hollow, rehearsed laugh Marjorie had just performed for the lobby crowd. Mine came from deep in the chest. Low, slow, and edged in disbelief. They really didn't know. All this time, they thought I was bluffing. They never even bothered to check the systems, never questioned who signed the approval letters. They were too busy dismissing me, too comfortable thinking I'd never rise. They built their arrogance, I murmured, on the assumption that I would never rise. They never checked the ink already dry. I leaned forward, setting the phone gently in the center console. Power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it waits in stillness. Sometimes it lets the storm pass, only to walk through the wreckage afterward and pick up the crown that everyone else forgot was there. I didn't start the car. Not yet. I needed to sit with this, let it soak in. They had laughed at my silence, mocked it, feared nothing from it. And that silence, they were about to learn, was where my sharpest blade lived. I drove home slowly, not out of hesitation, but control. When I arrived, the afternoon sun was already casting long shadows across the front lawn. I moved through the kitchen, dropped my keys onto the counter, and poured a glass of water like it was just another Tuesday. Upstairs, I kicked off my shoes and sat at the edge of the bed. No tears came. Not now. That part had passed. What settled in instead was something far more dangerous: clarity. My eyes drifted to my phone again, still glowing faintly on the dresser. That email, that small digital flicker in my palm. It reminded me of something I should have never forgotten. I wasn't powerless. I was holding the blade. I sat alone in my home office, the only light coming from the desk lamp and the dull blue glow of my laptop screen. The walls around me were quiet, but inside, the storm had just begun to organize. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't need to. My hands moved methodically, clicking, typing, flipping through folders I hadn't opened in months. Passwords, signatures, sealed records, all legal, all mine. I pulled out the file that held the authority Marjorie mocked, the digital certificate, notarized, time-stamped, the one she never imagined existed. I lived my life hiding my light, I whispered to the empty room. But tonight, the shadows work for me. I cued the paperwork. A formal internal audit request. No drama, no shouting, just structure and policy, language she couldn't laugh off or brush aside. I submitted it quietly, digitally signed, routed through the proper board channels. With one click, the machinery was in motion. I didn't need revenge. I needed clarity. And this was how it started. A full week passed. I let the days move slow, like chess pieces lining up across a long board. I went about my work, answered emails, joined virtual meetings, and took calls from board members who, by now, had started to whisper questions about the Houston branch. Then came Monday. I dressed simply: dark slacks, a white blouse, hair pulled back. No jewels, no flash, just composure. It was nearly 10 a.m. when I stepped back into the bank. The same lobby, the same marble floors, scent of lemon cleaner, and buzz of printers and distant conversations. But everything felt different. I walked slowly. No guards rushed me this time, no one shouted. But I felt the air shift as eyes turned. They remembered. They remembered how I'd been dragged out like a trespasser. Whispers followed me like wind trailing behind a storm window cracking open. "That's her. Isn't that?" I approached the front desk. The same clerk from last week looked up, startled, before quickly lowering her gaze. "Good morning," I said evenly. "Could you please notify Mr. Langston I've arrived?" Her fingers fumbled over the phone. Langston, board liaison, high-ranking compliance officer, met me just minutes later. Tall, pressed suit, and a face that wore seriousness like an accessory. "Ms. Whitlow," he greeted with a nod full of intent. "Shall we go upstairs?" No theatrics, no loud entrances. But in that moment, the silence said everything. Gasps, tiny ones, muffled behind palms and computer screens, rippled across the room. One employee stood up slowly. Another nudged a colleague. I didn't turn. I didn't smile. I just walked with Langston, my heels tapping out a rhythm of return. That's when I heard her voice. "Marjorie." "You again?" Her heels clicked rapidly across the tile. "I thought I made it clear last time." She stopped cold. Langston, who hadn't even flinched, turned to her with professional calm. "Ms. Klein," he said, "may I introduce Arlena Whitlow, CEO." It was surgical. Her face froze in place. The air around her sagged like a popped balloon. My brother Kenneth, if he had been there, would have tried to smooth it over. "Let's not make this a thing," he would have said, hands raised. But he wasn't there. This was her moment. Hers alone. I looked at her, calm, no fire in my tone. "I'm here on official business," I said simply. "This is not a personal visit." And with that, I followed Langston toward the elevators. I didn't need her reaction. I'd already won the first move. Upstairs, we reviewed the audit schedule. Langston handed me the updated reports. "Your request was approved immediately," he said. "They'll begin reviewing internal activity at this branch starting Wednesday." "Thank you," I replied. Before leaving, I turned back once, toward the glass walls that overlooked the floor below. I saw Marjorie pacing inside her office. Her posture was all sharp turns and snapping gestures. Buford Hayes stood near the far end of the lobby, holding a newspaper he wasn't reading. He caught my eye again, just like that day, and gave a slow, thoughtful nod, like he understood something most people in that building didn't yet. I nodded back, not in triumph, but in acknowledgement. He'd seen what they tried to hide. That night, at home, I sat again at the same desk. This time with tea instead of tension. The documents were done. The system was moving. I didn't need to tear her down. The structure would do that for me. They'd mocked me for being quiet, for being invisible. But I knew something they didn't. Sometimes the blade is sharper when left in its sheath a moment longer. They say pride comes before the fall, but they never talk about what pride looks like right before it digs its heels in. And that morning, when I walked back into the bank for the board's scheduled liaison meeting, Marjorie was beaming like a woman who thought she'd already won. She was waiting for me by the elevator, too poised, too still. "Back so soon?" she asked, smiling as if we were sisters meeting for brunch. I didn't answer. I simply stepped inside when the doors opened. She followed. A few staff exchanged uneasy glances as we passed. Whispers buzzed softly behind polished desks, and Buford Hayes sat in the far corner again, thumbing through a newspaper but not really reading. I caught the slight movement of his head as he glanced up, catching the tension like static in the air. We were escorted to the same glass-walled conference room upstairs. Me, Marjorie, the board liaison Mr. Langston, and to my surprise, Kenneth. My brother entered last, adjusting his tie like this was just another minor inconvenience in his busy day. The table was already set with water glasses, notepads, and legal files. Langston greeted us all with neutral professionalism, but I could feel it. He sensed something wasn't right. Marjorie broke the silence. "I've asked for this meeting to clarify some documentation," she said, voice syrupy smooth. "There seems to have been a misunderstanding." She pulled a manila folder from her briefcase and laid it in front of her with careful precision, like she was presenting evidence in a courtroom. I already knew it would be a show. Langston opened it. His brows twitched slightly. "These appear to be duplicates of the CEO appointment forms," he said, scanning. "Is there an issue?" "Yes," Marjorie replied, crossing her arms, leaning back like a woman who'd already scored the point. "Those signatures, especially the timestamp and approval sequence, they're inconsistent with our internal protocols. Frankly, I suspect they may be forged." The room went quiet. I blinked once, not because I was shocked, but because I was impressed. She'd gone all in. Kenneth cleared his throat. "Look," he said, hands steepled together. "Arlena has always meant well, but she's been ambitious in ways that don't always line up with reality." He wouldn't meet my eyes. "She's always been dramatic," he continued. "Even as a teenager, she wanted recognition for things she didn't earn. I think maybe she believes this, because she needs it to be true." It wasn't the lie that hurt. It was his voice lending it weight. My own brother. I looked at him, but he refused to look back. That cut deeper than any folder on that table. Langston glanced at me, his face unreadable. I knew he was measuring not just what was said, but how it was said. And Marjorie, emboldened now, leaned forward. "This woman walked in off the street and demanded $5 million. She made a scene. She embarrassed this institution. Now she's waving around documents that don't hold up under scrutiny." I'm just doing my job by calling that out. She smiled at me. Fake. Clean. Poison in a pretty bottle. But I didn't flinch. I let her dig. I didn't interrupt. I didn't defend. I watched the smug tilt of her chin, the arrogant lift of Kenneth's shoulders as if siding with her made him brave. I said nothing, because I knew something they didn't. Their entire case hinged on a lie they assumed I couldn't prove false. Narration filled my mind like a calm tide rolling in. The higher she climbed her false pedestal, the harder her fall would be. I looked at Langston. I understand the concern, I said. If there's doubt, it should be addressed. I welcome a full internal review. Marjorie's smile faltered, just slightly. Langston nodded. I'll begin the cross-check process this afternoon. We'll pull original approval records and digital chain of custody logs. Her confidence cracked again, because deep down she knew. The real documents, the untouched ones, were already stored in the corporate cloud, filed under multiple executive authorizations with multi-point security tracking, and I had access. I watched her as she tried to recover, too proud to back down now. Kenneth stayed silent this time. After the meeting ended, I stepped out of the room without saying a word to either of them. Buford was still downstairs when I returned to the lobby. He looked at me for a moment longer this time, then folded his paper, stood up slowly, and walked out without a word. But I caught the smallest curl of a smile on his lips. It was the kind of smile that said, "They have no idea what's coming." And they didn't. Because while they gloated, I realized the proof of their lies was already in my hands. The door clicked softly shut behind me. Same conference room, same stale air, same people pretending they weren't playing a game they thought they'd already won. I didn't look at Marjorie. Not yet. Kenneth sat stiffly near the end of the table, gaze bouncing anywhere but mine. Mr. Langston, the board liaison, adjusted his cuffs with deliberate calm. 2 other board members joined today, Mrs. Schultz and Mr. Bernal, both neutral for now, faces unreadable. And just before we started, I noticed a figure settle into a seat in the back corner of the room. Buford Hayes. He didn't say a word, didn't even nod this time. But he was here, and that mattered more than any whisper behind glass doors. I took my seat across from Marjorie and opened my leather folder slowly. No drama, no grand speech, just precision. They thought my silence was weakness, I thought. They never understood silence can be strategy. Marjorie leaned forward with that same smug tilt to her chin. "Well," she said sweetly, "are we ready to wrap this up?" I didn't answer. Instead, I pulled out a single printed email. Not a copy, not a screenshot, the original PDF from legal counsel, time-stamped, digitally signed, linked to the secure corporate chain of custody system. My appointment as CEO, finalized 6 months ago, approved unanimously by the Board of Trustees. Langston took the page and read silently. Then he looked up, brows drawn together. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the USB I laid beside it. "Please," I said. He connected it to the screen. My entire file opened. Internal memos, transfer of authority letters, encrypted confirmation emails. Nothing altered, everything tracked by our corporate servers. Mrs. Schultz leaned in. Mr. Bernal rubbed his chin slowly. The silence thickened. Marjorie shifted in her seat. I caught it. Just a flicker. The first crack. "I'd like to note," I said, voice steady, "these documents are fully verified and archived in our internal systems, which means any alternate version presented yesterday would, by definition, be a fabrication." Langston's lips thinned. "Yes, I see that now." Still, I wasn't done. I turned to face the board fully. "There's something else I think you should hear." Before Marjorie could interrupt, Buford stood up from the corner, slowly pulling out his phone. "With permission," he said, voice clear. "I have something I recorded last week. I didn't mean to get involved, but it didn't sit right with me." Langston gave a nod. Buford tapped the screen and set the phone down. A burst of laughter echoed from the speaker. Then Marjorie's voice, sharp, proud, unmistakable. "If you even have a balance, I'll pay you double!" Gasps, a few sharp exhales, and then the sound of staff chuckling in the background, the very moment she publicly humiliated me, caught clean. Marjorie's eyes widened, her jaw hanging open for just a breath before she snapped shut. "That's taken out of context," she sputtered. He wasn't even part of this. He has no business." Langston raised a hand. "It's your voice, Miss Klein." "I was joking." "No one was laughing with you." Kenneth finally spoke, but his voice was faint. "Marjorie." She whipped toward him. "Don't start now." I let the silence swell, because that silence held more weight than any accusation. It was the sound of a room realizing it had been played. It was the echo of truth settling in. They came armed with lies, I thought. And I let them speak first, because nothing exposes a fraud faster than the fraud believing they're safe. Marjorie stood up suddenly, tossing her chair back. "This is political. It's jealousy. She's always envied me. You can't seriously think she—" She turned toward Langston, then Schultz, then Bernal. "You're not going to believe her over me, are you?" But no one answered. Even Kenneth stayed seated, jaw clenched, his shoulders sagging like someone who had finally seen the whole picture and didn't like what it showed. I didn't need to gloat. I didn't need to lecture. The proof spoke louder than my voice ever could. And in that silence, everyone knew the verdict was already written. The days that followed were quiet, but not silent. The kind of quiet that hummed just beneath the surface, like something heavy had finally settled, and no one dared disturb it. I sat at the far end of the long table in the boardroom, light from the overhead panels glinting off the polished wood. My hands were folded neatly in front of me, palms cool. I didn't need to say much. Today wasn't for defense or revenge. It was for truth. Marjorie sat across from me, her usual confidence stripped down to something brittle and cracking. Her lipstick was smudged slightly, and her blouse, though pressed, hung off her like armor that didn't fit anymore. Langston began the meeting with formality, but his tone carried no warmth. After reviewing all documentation, recordings, and internal correspondence, the board has unanimously agreed that Ms. Klein's actions constitute a breach of ethical and operational conduct. I didn't move. Marjorie shifted in her seat. Kenneth, beside her, stared at the folder in front of him like it might save him from drowning. "Mockery of clients, fabrication of internal documentation, attempted fraud," Langston continued. "Your managerial authority is revoked, effective immediately." Marjorie let out a low, hollow laugh. "This is a setup. You all let her walk in here with her documents like it meant anything." "No one let me do anything," I said, finally speaking. "You gave me the stage. I just brought the truth." Kenneth's head turned slightly, but he couldn't look me in the eyes. Not once. That, more than anything, pierced deepest. They had tried to erase me with ink that washed off. I had returned with stone. When the meeting adjourned, the room didn't empty quickly. It dispersed slowly, like a crowd after a funeral. Quietly. Respectfully. Marjorie stood with a sharp shove of her chair, grabbing her bag. "You'll regret this," she hissed at no one in particular. Her heels clicked against the tile as she stormed out, shoulders squared, but her stride had lost all rhythm. Kenneth followed, slower, his steps weighted. He glanced back once, just once, and in that glance I saw not apology, not remorse, but something worse. Shame. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His silence screamed louder than anything he'd ever said in my defense. Buford lingered behind, the last to leave aside from me. As he passed, he paused, gave a short nod, and placed a folded note on the table near my hand. He didn't wait for acknowledgement. Inside was just a single line in neat pen. "Some of us always knew who you were." That afternoon, I went home. It was cloudy, the kind of gray that doesn't promise rain, but still makes the air feel heavy. I poured myself a cup of tea, not out of need, but habit, and sat at the small table near my window. The hum of the city moved faintly through the glass. The quiet was thick, but this quiet was mine. I looked around at the space I had reclaimed over the years, the shelves I'd filled with books no one bothered to ask about, the desk I had restored myself, piece by piece, when I needed something to fix after being ignored for too long. Vindication doesn't fix everything. It doesn't erase the ache of betrayal or restore the childhood where you were overlooked, spoken over, or patted on the head for dreaming too loudly. It doesn't give you back the years you doubted your own voice. But it does something else. It clears the fog. It reminds you that the wounds you carried weren't always yours to begin with. They were projections, fears, insecurities other people handed you, hoping you'd wear them like armor so they wouldn't have to see their own reflection. I let out a slow breath and rested my hand over my chest, just for a moment. They lost everything not because I fought loud, I thought, but because I let truth speak. Marjorie could spin whatever story she wanted now, but the board wouldn't listen. Her title was gone. Her power crumbled. And Kenneth? Well, he had to look in the mirror now and see who he chose to stand beside. I didn't feel like celebrating. It wasn't that kind of victory. It was quiet. It was steady. It was earned. Later that evening, I opened a notebook I hadn't touched in years. The pages were still lined with sketches, ideas, plans I once jotted down when I thought someone might finally ask what I wanted. No one asked. But now, I didn't need them to. I picked up a pen, not to prove anything to them, but to remember something about myself. Sometimes the family you're born into will bury you alive. But if you rise, even quietly, the world will have no choice but to hear,